A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to video games that are totally awesome. So having had returned from a recent Louisville, Kentucky trip, I feel like that I've gotten a bit more creative in terms of what I could use to talk about throughout this whole series. And over the course of video games that are totally awesome, at least with this first season, I've got a lot of games that are worth talking about, both old and new. And I feel like that a certain quadrilogy worth of games, well, it's not exactly a quadrilogy, but there have in fact been 4 Sonic the Hedgehog games that have come around ever since I first did HJN graphics. And of course, from 2022 to the present, these games certainly did allow for some old as well as new Sonic fans to come around. The first one in particular that I'm going to talk about was a June 2022 release known as Sonic Origins. Because I had also gotten a hold of a few other games at the time, like TMNT Shredder's Revenge, that I've already covered in HJN Super Graphics. But of course, in this instance, I'd like to talk a bit about another summer 2022 release, and Sonic Origins was indeed one of them. So, why don't we go ahead and get started. As the title itself suggests, Sonic Origins is pretty much just a good collection of HD remastered versions of the older games. There were Sonic the Hedgehog from 91, 92 Sonic 2, 94 Sonic 3, and of course there would eventually come along Sonic CD, which most people would categorize as the most memorable title in the Sega CD. And to be fair, with all 4 of these games, they sure were the way to pave success, enough to compete with the likes of Super Mario Bros., if not surpass Super Mario Bros. The fact is, Yuji Tanaka, the original creator of the Sonic the Hedgehog character, was more than willing to go up against Super Mario Bros. And in the same regard as how many other video game mascots that have been represented for different companies, and with other companies having their own unique mascots, I mean, you have Pac-Man, you have SpongeBob, you have Willy Wonka. It seems that with every company, they basically have their own flagship mascot, which really allowed for things to fly out the window. And Sonic the Hedgehog sure did put Sega itself into a lot of kids' minds. I myself was alongside them for the most part, even though I never really grew up in that particular generation when Sonic was first around. It's safe to say, this Origins collection did at least allow me to catch up full speed with the first 4 games. But as we know, there have been a lot of other Sonic games that either came alongside the original timeline that we had established, or even afterwards. And there, of course, was also the Sega Genesis collection. But I guess we'll get to that some other time. For now, though, Sonic Origins and the first 4 games basically goes along like this. With the first game, we do have ourselves a simple setup. Each level allows for impressive side-scrolling blast processing action, with Sonic himself being able to curl up into a ball, blast around at high speeds, with some impressive animation being flown through, such fluent detail, control with momentum action, allowing for you to adjust to his speed, or by chance if you need to slow down for anything in particular. There, of course, is the jumping, which is another big thing that most people need to develop a skill set for, because otherwise the jumping could possibly cause you to either fall off the stage and take a life, or it could allow you to ram into a hazard, which of course is the one way to lose all your rings. And while the story of the first game was mostly centering around Sonic and his arch nemesis Dr. Robotnik, later known as Eggman, the second game introduced the character Miles Tails Prower to the mix. And in '93, there would come along the first cartoon known as The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, in which that Jaleel White, the same way that he was able to gain popularity on TV over the years as Steve Urkel, would also be famous for voicing Sonic the Hedgehog. And then of course there was also blues singer Long John Baldry performing Dr. Robotnik. Quite a way to go, years before his death in 2005. The same year in which another actor of Eggman, Dean Bristow, had also passed on. But I guess I don't want to get too off track on all this lore and stuff that we've seen over the years, or coincidences. Because Sonic 2, like I said, Tails was first introduced. And this was certainly the one that I've had the biggest memories of, mainly because as a pretty young age, I actually got a hold of a bunch of Jack-specific plug-and-play TV games, which of course included the Sega Genesis library, though of course it was only 6 titles, which included Sonic 2, Echo the Dolphin, The Ooze, and a few other titles. With Sonic 3, however, even though I've had some experience in that field just as well, I will say that not as much gameplay came through Sonic 3 as much as would have come through Sonic 2. And I will say that my personal bests, in terms of all these games up until that point, were actually way better. Probably the best that I could have done so far. And with Sonic 3, I also managed to get pretty far. With Sonic 1, I managed to get all the way through Act 5. And with Sonic 2, it was a similar reaction. Although I did get rather close to beating Act 6. And with Sonic 3, it unfortunately didn't fare up all too well. Barely got up to Act 5 without losing all my lives. And basically calling it quits at that point. But in terms of the storyline for Sonic 3, I might as well add Knuckles the Echidna. The less said the better. But for those who might not know, even after watching a lot of storyline and lore unfold, I'll just go ahead and make a quick breakdown. Sonic and Tails are flying on the famous plane known as the Tornado. Sonic goes super with all the Chaos Emeralds he's collected, and Knuckles slams him. That's apparently enough to knock Super Sonic out, and all the emeralds fall onto the ground. Knuckles picks them up, snickers, then wanders off in the other direction, forcing you to chase after him. Of course, when you're going out there on a certain island, you might as well take advantage of what you can find. But Sonic and Tails, of course, were there for no particular reason. The lore, of course, does state that the reason why Knuckles attacked Tails and Sonic was because Eggman did put a ploy on Knuckles to trick him into thinking that Sonic and Tails were 2 thieves planning to steal the so-called Master Emerald, while Eggman would actually be the one who would swipe the gem for his own devious schemes. And Knuckles, unfortunately, fell victim to his own naivete. And it's true that, unfortunately, Knuckles ain't really the brightest guy in the entire cast. But, of course, after having a bit of a battle with Sonic and Tails, they eventually agree to work together and stop Eggman from achieving his ploy with the Master Emerald. That's basically the basic gist out of it. The 3 would eventually become good allies with each other. And Knuckles, of course, would become a prime member of Team Sonic, even going forward, and having a good friendship with the 2 and beyond. With Sonic CD, however, we did get even more introduced. We certainly can't forget about the famous animated intro, the unique way of bringing CDs to the market. I mean, it was one thing where we already had an entire cartoon dedicated to Sonic, but the following year, 94, came along the CD game. And then, of course, there was that famous song that accompanied the intro, Sonic Boom. 20 years, wouldn't you know, before an actual Sonic Boom would come around. That, of course, was another cartoon, which I probably ought to start talking a little more about since it's over 10 years old now. But again, I don't need to get off topic on that part. Most people will consider Sonic CD to probably be one of the best and one of the most intense out of all the games thus far. And it's mostly because of another main character that's introduced known as Amy Rose. Of course, while the other 3 games were known for having protagonists such as Tails and Knuckles accompany Sonic on his adventures, there of course was a spin-off known as Sonic and Knuckles, which came around the same time as Sonic CD, also on the Genesis. But in the case of Sonic CD, we only have Sonic here to play around with. And even more so, Amy Rose is the one that we have to basically rescue. There, of course, was a certain device that Eggman has put up, and it gets even crazier when you know that, whoopity-doo, Eggman has apparently made a robot version of Sonic, simply called Metal Sonic. And while I unfortunately didn't get all that far in Sonic CD to face down against him, keep in mind, Metal Sonic would apparently become a much bigger role in the franchise from years to come. First appearing again in 1999 with the official OVA Sonic the Hedgehog film, and then of course there would be a few other usages of Metal Sonic throughout the series. In 2011, when Sonic was celebrating his 20th anniversary, there came along Sonic Generations, and classic Sonic would actually be seen taking on Metal Sonic as a special boss fight. But it's mostly for collecting a Chaos Emerald. But I guess we'll get to that at some point, because Sonic Generations, wouldn't you know, had actually gotten itself a remastered along with a polar opposite known as Shadow Generations. I guess we'll save that one for last, because I still do have a few others that I want to cover. So, if you want to see more go down on my channel, I guess first of all I should probably give my score for Sonic Origins. It's a good collection for what it is, and the challenge is all there, just as most old school gamers might expect. But the way I see it, it's more about the modern games that show a lot of storytelling, world building, and of course having a good cast for us to recognize. All the lovable characters that were introduced over the years were gradually brought on with each new installment in the main timeline, and some spin-offs and trade-offs and whatnot, dream sequences and retconning, did allow for the timeline to become a little mixed up. So we'll just put Sonic Origins at a somewhat measly yet effective 7.6 out of 10.1. And of course, if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side.